Hello, everybody, and well, good evening here. This is, what day is this? This is the 10th of February, and 2017. Okay, and we're moving on to Rays and Initiations webinar commentary, really Rays and the Initiations, okay, but that's my little abbreviation for it. We're moving on to commentary number 63. We've been talking about the great decision that was made in the beginning of the century and which precipitated two world wars, which I think were really, in a way, one world war, at least as the Tibetan seems to see it. The initiates of the sixth degree worked in a concerted manner, and this was very helpful. Stimulating energies were produced and then major destructive energies. So it's a two-way sword. They were supposed to they decided to tread the path of Earth service, a small but powerful group, in order to bring about the changes which they sensed as desirable and as already existing within the consciousness of the one initiator, the planetary logos. So they conformed to what they sensed was the will of the planetary logos. It was their decision taken early in the century, I suppose 1903, which precipitated in the center, which we call the race of men, those potencies and stimulating energies which produced that major destructive agency, the World War, 1914 to 1945. It occurred in two phases. The effects were good and bad: human unity, unanimity, human planning for group welfare, human creativity expressed through science, received a tremendous stimulation, and simultaneously, however, the entering potencies released by this decision produced an upsurging of evil in the hearts of men. Well, by heart, do we mean the desire body in this case? In the hearts of men so inclined, leading to an analogous or paralleling unity, unanimity, and creative activity of separative and hateful evil. This in its turn opened the door where evil dwelt and let loose on earth the full fury of the Black Lodge. The Black Lodge, seeing its opportunity, the selfish individuals, all of whom had a powerful first ray in some aspect of their nature, gathered around Hitler, and a focal point for Black Lodge expression was created. And we know that the Second World War was much more intense than the first, although interestingly, the First World War almost came to such a pass that it was the solar logos which was considering an intervention. Every time I hear that, I find it an amazing piece of information. You know, we're not talking about a shambolic intervention here. We're talking about a solar logoic intervention, but it didn't have to happen. In 1917, this intention was obviated, and humanity began to solve its own problems with respect to that war. Now we move on. The door was opened, at least in the Second World War, where evil dwelt. The door has unfortunately been left somewhat ajar, and the forces of evil again are attempting to enter. And this, I think, we can clearly see as we see the reactionary tendencies of many nations who want to pull back from the unitive position which they achieved with respect to their fellow nations following the Second World War, all that tends towards human unity, towards international unity and freedom within that unity is positive and in line with the divine plan. All that reverts to separative nationalism, which is egoism or even egotism on the national level, is a reversion to a previous condition which is not in line with the divine plan. So we go on that this would be the result the masters knew when making their decision. So this was certainly not unconscious on their part. And I want to, if I can do that, yeah, certain. And I want to do also certainly. Okay, we'll try that. So they had that kind of prevision which we can expect the Chohan to have, and even more so when they gathered in that small but powerful group. They consciously struck a blow at materialism, which was binding humanity and imprisoning the human spirit. And of course, the forces of materialism would naturally react to that blow being struck, and hence the war. But of course, the war arose because a great improvement was in process, and the forces of materialism attempted to stop it. And the materialism was hidden or disguised by what these Axis powers considered to be a high form of idealism. They framed it in terms of the welfare of the human being, especially considering themselves the leaders in producing that kind of welfare. The great warrior, the great specimen of humanity, the glory of Rome, all of these attempts to reclaim an ancient glory, they never amount to any good. And so it is a warning sign when we say, make any country great again, recapturing some ancient, idealized, and often glamorized glory. It leads to no good. So anyway, this blow against materialism, says the Tibetan here, this evoked a prompt reaction from the forces of evil, which had created and held in being the modern materialistic world with its emphasis upon forms and money. So DK tells us that Bismarck was an kind of avatar of materialism and a representative of the Black Lodge. Looking at some of the things he did, that may be hard to understand, but the masters have a deeper insight than we do. The motto there for Bismarck and for the Germany of that period was blood and iron. Well, what do you think when you hear that? If the motto of the nation was blood, let's see if we spell it correctly, and iron, this suggests the non-sacred planet, and SACPT, and I think non-SACPT, non-sacred planet, Mars. It suggests the non-sacred planet, Mars, which is less evolved. than the Earth. So the attack was from those who responded to the Martian impulse. Certainly Japan did with its strong Scorpio later on, and Germany, of course, with its Aries soul, responded to Mars because the soul energies can be misappropriated by the personality. When it comes to Italy, we have Leo and Sagittarius. Perhaps they were less Martian, but certainly tending towards self-glorification embodied in Mussolini, who had Scorpio rising, hence the ruler Mars again. The masters had confidence that the human spirit would be able to live through the period of upheaval and emerge eventually into the new era. So, the masters are willing to tolerate what to us seem like appalling circumstances. But they know that the human spirit is immortal, and as DK said, there are worse fates than death. I suppose the suffocation for years, for cycles, for ages of the human spirit, and the cutting off of the immersed human spirit from its higher sources would be a worse fate. The constriction of the human spirit by material forces would be at least a temporary negation of all human potential. It would be a great slavery. So they had confidence that this would not happen. So the human spirit, it's a vague term, but we do mean essentially the monad soul of humanity, the inner life of humanity, would be able to live through this period of upheaval and emerge eventually into the new era. We're emerging now, ready to build the new world and to reorganize all human resources, material, mental, and spiritual. So this is a Uranian impulse. And we know that Uranus is a great planet of organization and reorganization, fitting with the seventh ray, which is the ray of the soul of the Uranian planetary logos. So their vision is long and deep, and what seems to them like even a minor upheaval may look disastrous to us, and what looks thoroughly disastrous to us may seem to them to be of little consequence, though certainly the war was of great consequence, and the question existed whether humanity would make its way through it. It was touch and go for a while, as we learned that in the latter months of 1942, the hierarchy felt that humanity would go down to defeat, a tremendous disaster, and they were actually preparing themselves to withdraw. But the Lords of Liberation responded to deliberate and inchoate human invocation, and we are told this miraculous thing by the time the sun moved northward at the December solstice of 1942, the issue was inwardly resolved. The forces of light had won. No matter what terrible things did occur on the outer plane, that was just the working out of forces which had been set in motion. Where would we get information like this, an understanding like this? Sometimes I think we may forget how much we have been given and how little many people have when they attempt to make sense of human events. They don't have the perspective that the Master has given to us, and they have to do their best with more human logic and reasoning. Okay. So anyway, see, what do we have here? We looked at we're in number 2, which was handled in the last discussion, I think so. Oh, the word hammer, not hammer, ran into it. And number 1, intense creative activity. It falls into 2 parts, okay, and we've learned about that. Destruction and restoration. And then this is going to be, I have to straighten out these numbers. So we'll call this number 2, and we'll okay. So this is what we need to do. Thanks for your patience. And this will be number 2, the second paragraph, telling about the masters of the 6th degree who made that decision. And let's see if there's any way here to continue numbering. Okay, does it allow us to do that? Set number value, we'll call it 2. No, it gives me a B. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll turn this off while I get it straightened out. Okay, now I think I've done that, and we are then in paragraph 3 here. And now we're talking about humanity's response, and not so much about this group of Chohans who concentrated their spiritual intention in a project which assailed the grip of materialism upon the human spirit. All this going on behind the scenes. Indeed, we all are well cared for, but we have to act in an individual way according to our individual will, which we align with the superior intentions. Free will under the Syrian law is inviolate on our planet. The response of humanity from the angle of a spiritual realization of the presented opportunity was the emergence of the new group of world servers. Okay, well, you know, this the concerted focus of the Chohans began with the great decision of 1903. So the new group of world servers emerged in the mid-20s and more objectively in the early 30s. They appeared in every country. They were empowered by the ashrams, we know, but they were those men and women of goodwill and of some accomplishment and attainment who stepped forth and made it their project to serve humanity. They appeared in every country, conscious of their task of crystallizing and making effective human goodwill, though generally unconscious of their hierarchical relationship. So, you know, there are many in the new group of world servers who are still unconscious of that relationship. And the new group of world servers contains initiates of different degrees, all the way from the first, I would say, but more specifically the second, up to higher members of the third and even fourth degree who are quite aware of what their hierarchical affiliations may be, though not necessarily all. Maybe by the time we're taking the fourth degree, they are quite aware, but I think it would be still possible to serve humanity intensively without being thoroughly aware of the structure of the hierarchical background. Their appearance evoked an immediate reaction from the spiritual hierarchy, and experienced disciples made their appearance in the ranks of the new group of world service. That's what I was talking about. Not only those who wanted to help but did not know the source of their inspiration, so not only those wanting to help but who did not know the source of their inspiration, but those who knew. Experienced disciples made their appearance in the ranks, directing their efforts, voicing their aims, and stimulating their understanding. Of course, it's also possible, to be an experienced disciple and not necessarily know the technical occultism. It's also possible to be an experienced disciple and to relinquish your knowledge of the technical occultism that you once knew, so you have a clearer path, a less obstructed path, a less complicated path to perform the immediate service before your eyes. The new group worked in and through every department of human thinking, human welfare, and human planning. And that's the whole thing, spirituality is not captured by religion alone. As a matter of fact, religion has been the source of many abuses which have somehow blanketed or veiled spirituality. So as DK told us, that's one of the great triumphs of the Black Lodge, to see human beings confine the notion of spirituality to orthodox religion. Hopefully, in this day and age, those kinds of attitudes are failing, but still many, even many we may know, still maintain that connection. If you're going to be spiritual, you have to be religious in the orthodox sense. So anyway, human planning, human welfare, human thinking. As a result, and almost immediately, men of goodwill everywhere in the world took heart of grace, amazing phrase, a most appropriate phrase, and became active. So the 1930s were a time of great activity among the men and women of goodwill. Okay, I'm going to throw that one in too, if you don't mind. And every time I do an M, it's going to be a capital. But let's see what happens. Men and women of goodwill. No, it's going to be. I have to be more careful. Okay. Later, it all helps, So we'll put it this way: men and women of goodwill. So, and great attempts were made under a second race cycle to forestall or to negate the possibility of the second objectified phase of the Great War. They called World War I the Great War, the war to end all wars, but of course it ended with a kind of armistice, and it did not end with a thorough defeat of those forces which represented materialism. The Bismarck idea was still there in Germany, and Japan was trying to resurrect the old samurai way of life, the credo of the samurai. When people feel dejected, dispirited, in some way having lost a great reputation or capacity, they look backward nostalgically towards those earlier times and seek, because of their dejection, to regain their status, or the status they experienced or their country experienced in those earlier times. I sometimes think, that when we look at the early armies of Islam in the 7th century and 8th century and beyond, many of those warriors have returned. They were in a period of great conquest then, and many groups and cultures, civilizations fell before them, and then they were defeated, and they went into a state of abjection and loss of self-esteem, loss of the glory they had had, and now in this recrudescence of the sixth ray, those same warriors want to reclaim that former glory. It's always a bad sign, the reclamation of former glory. Every group affiliated with the Black Lodge has had that as some kind of motivation. There's more to name, I'll just name France at one point of the French kings, DK tells us, and Italy, and Germany, reclaiming the glory of the ancient Teuton with all of his psychic powers, which had been bred away through interbreeding with inferior races, as they called it, and Japan, reclaiming the glory of the samurai, and so forth. It is the kind of thing which works against progress, as the divine plan envisions that progress. Anyway, it took heart of grace and became active. So Goodwill really rose in the 30s. Let's see if I can get this correctly. Certainly have to have goodwill, right? Okay, so here we go. Goodwill rose in the 1930s, but would it be enough to stop the inner advance of the forces of materialism? Now, Master Moria was already writing about these forces, even in the 1920s, through the Ruriks, and especially and ESPL, especially through Helena Rurik. We know that some of those books were his own words, and some were her words under his inspiration, and some were simply her words. And that's how DK describes the taking down of those books. And Daniel Enton, who recently passed, he knew even more about it. We still have to evaluate everything carefully, and we cannot, as DK says, take something as gospel and speak about it with bated breath because it is the work of a master. The introduction to each one of the books, extract from a statement by the Tibetan, tells us how responsible we are to use our own intuition and not simply fall into the credulity of the authoritarian personality, so often on the sixth ray. Okay. The 3 points made here will demonstrate to you, there's a period of destruction and a period of rebuilding. There was the coming forth, point number 2, of coming forth of the Chohans of the 6th degree, and they made an impact against materialism. And then there was humanity's response, which was quite good in many respects, but those who had long nurtured selfishness were also empowered. If they had lived many lives of selfishness, well, that selfishness gained a great empowering because there was a shambolic access without going through the process of soul infusion, bypassing the soul of love and many functions, simply in relation to the first and third ray, the will and then the personality to carry out that will without the interposition of the love energy. So the 3 points made here will demonstrate to you the factual nature of the circulation of energies. Okay, let's see. All these happenings are part of the process of planetary initiation. Well, we're going through it certainly, and on page 384 of the Cosmic Fire, he tells us about the suffering which is part of our planetary logos is passing through a type of fourth initiation on our fourth planetary chain. So the 3 points made here will demonstrate to you the factual nature of the circulation of energies. All these happenings are part of the process of planetary initiation. Such an initiation cannot take place without important effects, both in the hierarchy and in the human family. I mean, certainly we're not going to be untouched by a major advance in consciousness and power of the one in whom we live and move and have our being, the closest of those ones, the planetary logos. We as the cells, so to speak, we might call them like monadic cells in the planetary logos, are going to experience the effects and the projection of ourselves as monads, namely through the soul and through the personality. Those vehicles would experience the effects. In old Atlantean days, it was the masters facing the same sixth initiation who, quote, decided to bring that ancient civilization to an end. And, you kind of wonder, did they, again, sense in the consciousness of Sanat Kumara the will to do so, just as now, recently, they sensed his will to make an impact on materialism, or to instead of make an impact, maybe we should say strike a major blow at materialism. So that's interesting. It was the masters who decided to bring that ancient civilization to an end. It must have been a grievous time, and through that time, it's almost certain that a great many of us have lived. Those who came from the earlier solar system, those who came from the moon chain, those who were individualized in Middle Lemuria, all of those human beings were present at that time. And this means that the likes of us have passed through the destruction of the ancient Atlantean civilization. Now, there are notable instances of terrible destruction, but it seems that Atlantis in a way was spread all over the world, and some places may have experienced less of the deluge than others, although there were several deluges. When DK tells us that America or the United States was the center of the old Atlantean civilization and hence its present psychism, we wonder how much of the destruction pertained to that particular center. As to the sinking of islands and other areas inundated, I'm not sure we know the technicalities. Maybe HPB describes them more, but there was a great destruction, and a certain seed of the fifth root race had to be extracted from the dangerous areas so that they could continue to bring the human race forward. And in that sense, it was not the entirety of the human race that was destroyed. because the fifth root race seed had to perpetuate the race. So anyway, they decided. They therefore sacrificed the form aspect of manifestation and created a situation in which the soul of humanity was liberated from the prison in which it found itself, and how serious was the old Atlantean civilization was the condition, of the old Atlantean civilization, ATN, that's good enough, civilization, probably quite serious. In other words, probably not capable of regeneration, because otherwise it would have been spared. So let's see, ATN, and we'll call this Atlantean. Okay. Today, a material catastrophe such as the flood, or the several floods, as HPB informs us, is not deemed necessary. So in other words, we're told that there will not be a destruction of the human race by flood, though it is said that there will be an attempt to destroy the Aryan race by fire, an attempt. Now, there's difference of opinion concerning whether that attempt was already made in the kind of Armageddon of the Second World War, or the last phase of the Great War, or whether it is impending. I think it's best to not let down our guard and to act as if, anyway, that there is a potential lying ahead for the destruction of the human race as it presently exists, at least in the introduction of Problems of Humanity. Master DK suggested that this was a possibility which could be clearly visioned. So we're still in the balance, and we have to act calmly and clearly still, as if humanity is in grave danger until certain relationships have been adjusted and until a greater spirit of reason sweeps through humanity. Some measure of peace, some measure of sharing, and the religious organizations, he calls it the church, but okay, have to clean house. These things must be done, or, there could be a great retrogression and the loss of some, perhaps thousands of years of human progress, and even worse, possibly, the need to start a human race again, to see if a race could not be raised up which could obey the law and conform to the divine plan as that divine plan was given to them or released to them. Well, okay. So we do live in perilous times full of opportunity. And, if we could see more, I suppose we would be tremendously heartened and tremendously appalled simultaneously. How great is the decision lying before humanity. And the question arises whether we are equal in our own individual and group circumstances to rise to the occasion and give our all to perpetuating, or at least let's call it manifesting, the divine plan and obviating the imminent threat of the destruction of the present form of humanity. Madame Roerich, in one of her letters, I can't quote it exactly, but the idea was that Satan, as it is called, wants to engineer a great explosion on the earth, of course, and DK warned that living in an armed camp, as we do, there will be an explosion. He warned. So Satan wants to engineer this explosion, obviously a major nuclear exchange, which is a world explosion. And then these words I do remember quite exactly, float away on the wreck. Well, that would be, the destruction of the whole planet and a major disaster for our planetary logos. So stopping short of that kind of result, there are other possibilities which humanity would still consider very dire, given all the progress that it has made since that time 21 million years ago when individualization occurred. But if it is deemed necessary, and hopefully it is not deemed necessary, then we can make this transition into an age of wonder, the wonder of the new age as it is called, and bring forth the hidden potentials of the human race, which will be heartening and of great benefit to all. It's just this transition period between Pisces and Aquarius in the sense of the lesser precessional age, and also the transition between Pisces and Aquarius in terms of the great Platonic years of 25,000. These are the critical times. And if we can pass through these transitions intact and coherently and without having a great dystopian condition descend upon us, these various movies that show you what it's going to be like when after a nuclear war and everything goes wrong, it's pretty grim. If we can pass through this transition without those alternatives manifesting, then we will have made a major step together towards the fifth kingdom of souls, and quite a few human beings will be members of the fifth kingdom and able to guide aright those who are still struggling in the strictly human condition and not yet responsive to the fifth kingdom. Well, I'll tell you what, friends, I'm seeing looming ahead here in bold letters something, section 2, the aspirant and the major initiations. Okay, so that tells me that I have to end of Raise and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 63, and we're at page 555, so I guess we did 554 to 555, and today is the 10th of February, day of the full moon actually, or very close to the full moon depending on where you are. So this is the 10th of February, and now we will begin this new section of Raise and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 64 from page 556 and onward, and we'll see when we can do that, whether it will be yet today or whether I'll have to wait a while. If I had my choice, obviously I would do this hours and hours every day, as I sometimes have had the liberty to do, but one has to balance what one would deeply prefer to do against many karmic demands and circumstances. So we definitely do become, on this planet, adjudicators between the pairs of opposites, and we have to fulfill the demand that Caesar makes and the demand that Christ makes. We have to fulfill both, but increasingly, of course, it will be the demand of the Christ, and serving Caesar will become so natural in a positive way that we won't have to give great attention to it. So I'll get this ready for you, and we will then move on to number 64 in this entirely new section, which I think should have the right of commencing on its own and not just commence as the tale of some other section. But you have to admit that this is a very enriching section of text, and we are always grateful to the Tibetan as he has immensely widened our perspective. Okay, we'll see you soon, and for number 64.